Our foremothers weren't just making do with less. They had figured out systems that actually worked better than what we're doing today. They understood something that we have lost, that a well-run home, it's not about perfection or Pinterest-worthy aesthetics. It's about creating an environment that serves your life instead of demanding constant attention. And before you think this is going to be some lecture about how great the good old days were, I want to be clear. I'm not suggesting we give up modern conveniences or that everything was better back then. But there's practical wisdom in how our predecessors approached housekeeping that could solve a lot of overwhelm that we're feeling today. Hey, I'm Robin. I'm a retired yarners and I'm obsessed with historical cleaning routine and creating a home with a little bit less clutter around. Here is something that might sound revolutionary. Our grandmothers didn't spend their weekends catching up on housework because they never let it pile up in the first place. Crazy, right? Instead, they had weekly schedules that prevented overwhelm before it started. It's like car maintenance before having to rebuild the engine. You do the oil and the brakes and transmission fluid. Anyway, modern cleaning culture is basically ignore it, ignore it, ignore it, panic clean. So here's an example of an old-fashioned cleaning routine. Monday was laundry day. Tuesday was mending and repairs. Wednesday was cleaning and surveying the pantry and deep cleaning the icebox, or later, the refrigerator. Thursday was living areas, so they would clean, they would dust everything. And Friday was bedrooms and bathrooms. Now, Saturday was kitchen and final touches, and Sunday was rest. Now, before you roll your eyes and you think, this sounds super rigid and boring, think about it this way. When you know exactly what you're doing each day, you never have to make decisions about what needs attention. And if I can remove one more decision from my poor little brain, I will. Plus, the routines had a huge bonus. So instead of dreading Saturday morning and being like, oh my gosh, and overwhelmed by everything that needs to be done, you don't, because everything is mostly done by then. You're following your routine and you know that Sunday is coming, and Sunday is a day of rest. And yes, there are a lot of modern routines right now. There's Clean Mama and Fly Lady. My great friend Ariel, she has an amazing routine. But these wonderful ladies are foremothers. They laid the groundwork for the rest of us. In addition to a weekly routine, they had some very smart rules. Well, let's call them guidelines. And that is to ensure that things were done right. Now, one they lived by was the never walk away empty-handed rule. And this was invented for people like me because I was famously bad for leaving things near where they needed to go, which makes me a bit of a goose because then that just required more thinking and coming back later. Apparently, I enjoy creating scavenger hunts for my future self. So instead, they say, every time you move from room to room, you just carried something that belonged where you were going. So dishes to the kitchen, laundry to the hamper, books back to the bookshelf. And this wasn't about being obsessive, it was about preventing the accumulation of clutter that makes cleaning feel impossible and take way, way longer. The ultimate don't put it down, put it away, that our grandmothers understood, that daily maintenance was infinitely easier than weekend warrior cleaning. So they would dust surfaces every day. They would wipe down the stove after every use. So there would be like none of that burnt on grossness, therefore preventing the humbling experience of aggressively scraping oatmeal off the cooktop. And of course, they would sweep their floors throughout the day before dirt had a chance to get ground in and make the floors actually grimy. Now, it sounds like so much more work, but it actually was less work because nothing ever got truly dirty. They never had to scrub stuff that was stuck on. Plus, here's something that we've completely lost. And this is my new personal obsession if you've watched any of my videos in the past few months. They aired out their homes every single day. Windows open, beds stripped back to air the rooms, which allowed them to breathe. And they understood that fresh air was the best deodorizer and that stagnant air made everything feel heavier and more oppressive. The routine felt restrictive from the outside, but honestly, it just creates incredible freedom because when your home maintenance runs on autopilot, you don't spend mental energy deciding what to clean or feeling guilty about what you haven't cleaned. I often will compare it to like the bumpers along the, like a bowling alley that you put up for little kids when they're bowling. It just just never allows the ball to get in the gutter. Sometimes it's going down there real slow, but it keeps you on track. And what I love is you're the boss and you just do what is scheduled for the day and you move on with your life. So housewives of the past clean their entire homes with what we call the big five: white vinegar, baking soda, bar soap, ammonia, and lemons. That's it. No cabinet full of specialty cleaners, no different products for every surface, and no confusion about what to use where. And no cute little animated scrub brushes, bubbles, or bald guys to distract them. They did not have the time for that. Plus, they knew what worked, and it was easy and it was cheap. So let me break down how they actually used each of these powerhouse ingredients, because understanding the specifics of what made their system so effective is what will help you keep your house super clean right now. So white vinegar was their go-to for almost everything. They mixed it half and half with water for cleaning windows and mirrors because there was no streaks and no residue, just crystal clear glass. This same mixture would clean countertops. They would wipe down appliances, they would mop their floors. They also discovered that vinegar cuts through soap scum in bathrooms better than modern cleaners, and it naturally disinfects without harsh chemicals that you are worried are damaging your lungs, although you do want to be using it in a ventilated area, trust me. And for really stubborn mineral deposits on faucets or shower heads, they would soak rags in straight vinegar and wrap them around the fixtures overnight. Now that brings me to the other half of the volcano, baking soda, which was their gentle, abrasive, and odor eliminator. I still love using baking soda for scrubbing, and they would actually make a paste with just enough water to scrub sinks, tubs, and toilets without scratching the surface. It's so gentle on most things. They would sprinkle it on dry carpets and then let it sit for an hour, and then they would vacuum it up to remove odors. No fancy carpet deodorizers needed. In the refrigerator, you've probably seen this before, they would put an open box in which absorbs smells. And for really tough stains on their counters or cutting boards, they'd make a paste and they'd let it sit and before they would scrub it. I love baking soda for stuff like that. I use it to scrub my sink like every day. Now, bar soap is really interesting, and I did not know this. So usually something like Fell's naphtha or ivory was grated on a cheese grater and mixed with washing soda to make laundry detergent that actually got clothes cleaner than many modern formulas. They would also dissolve soap shavings in hot water to make all-purpose cleaners for walls, for woodwork, and general cleaning. A bar of soap lasted months, and it cost pennies compared to what we spend on multiple cleaning products today. Now, something we don't see as often, and I have not seen it, I think, since I was a kid at my mom's house. Maybe my grandma had it at her house, but it was ammonia. And this was their secret weapon for cutting through grease and grime, especially in the kitchen. They'd add a splash to a bucket of hot water for mopping, for the floors, or for cleaning appliances. And it would cut through cooking grease on stovetops and range hoods like nothing else. Also, as a side note, when was the last time you did your range hood? It's amazing how dirty those things can get, and the next thing you know, something's dripping down and you're like, what is that? Anyway, they also used it to clean their windows. Just a tablespoon in a quart of water, and it would give streak-free results if you didn't want to use vinegar. The key though, again, using it in a well-ventilated area and never mixing it with other cleaners. Now here's my favorite, and that's lemons. Lemons were nature's bleach and deodorizer. They rub cut lemon directly on cutting boards to remove stains and odors. They'd mix with salt and lemon juice to clean copper pots until they gleam like new. They used lemon juice to remove rust stains from fabric and to brighten whites in the laundry. Fresh lemon peels, okay, were put down the garbage disposal to freshen it. This is actually what my own grandma would do. She had a garbage disposal. Who here has a garbage disposal? Because they used to be like the thing and now they're not. My grandparents also had a trash compactor. Anybody else? No? No? Okay, lemons were also boiled on the stove to make the whole house smell clean and fresh. And as always, if you say lemons, I say yes. I love fresh lemons. I don't like artificial lemons, friends said. You tell me how you feel about that. Here's what's brilliant about this approach though. Fewer products meant less decision fatigue, less storage space needed, less money spent. But more importantly, these simple ingredients actually work better than many of our modern cleaners because they weren't trying to do 12 things at once. Each ingredient had specific strengths and they knew exactly how to use them. But if you compare them today, where we have different cleaners for glass and counters and floors and bathrooms and kitchens, every other surface imaginable, we spend more money and use more storage space, and it often gets worse results because we're not even sure which product to use where, plus the residue and the grime and safety. They also understood something we have forgotten about textiles. Instead of buying paper towels by the case, they would cut up old sheets, towels, and worn out clothing into rags. My own grandma, she did this with old t-shirts and towels. But here's the key. They had different rags for different purposes. So they would use soft cotton from old t-shirt for dusting, rougher terry cloth from those towels for scrubbing, smooth linen from old sheets for polishing glass and mirrors. And when the rags got too worn out for cleaning, they became shop rags or garden rags. Nothing was wasted. Plus, the organic cotton could be thrown on the compost. And they weren't being cheap or making do with less. Maybe they were, but it was actually about understanding that the right tool for the job wasn't often the most expensive or complicated option. They weren't wasteful. A damp cotton rag actually picks up dust better than a lot of modern dusting sprays because it traps particles instead of just moving them around. And unlike paper towel, cloth rags can be rinsed and reused multiple times during a cleaning session. The mindset was completely different. Instead of buying new products to solve problems, they just used what they had and it worked effectively. And then they just moved on. They forgot about it and it wasn't taking up space. Instead of replacing items when they got dirty or worn out, they would clean and maintain them properly. It was a system based on knowledge and skill, not consumption or convenience. Here's where our foremothers were absolute geniuses. They prevented problems instead of trying to solve them when things became overwhelming. They had a clean as you go mentality that kept small messes from becoming huge disasters. And as an aside, I am really, really clumsy. And just the other day, I was in a rush. So this is always what happens. When you're in a rush, you're gonna end up slowing yourself down because you're gonna make a mistake like I did. So I reached into the fridge, grabbed an egg, and quickly kind of closed it as I was, and I closed the egg in the door. So smashed egg all over all over the fridge. It was really annoying. I also, that very same week, dropped a big tub of my homemade yogurt on the floor. Now, my first instinct in both was just to do a quick wipe up so the cats didn't get it and then to come back later. But if I did that, I know I would forget and it would get all hard and gross. So I channeled my inner foremothers and I cleaned both blenders up ASAP. And now it's done. I didn't need to think about it again. Spills were cleaned up immediately. They weren't left to set and stain. Dishes were washed after every meal and not left to pile up in the sink. The kitchen was completely put back together. And dinner and lunch were often started right after breakfast so the women could focus on the rest of their work for the day. These were the OG slow cooker ladies and I am here for it. And don't forget, they did take breaks. There was often a morning break and an afternoon break. Beds were, of course, made every morning and not just when company was coming. And their clothes were hung up or put in a hamper and not just draped over a chair for days. So from my nursing background, I can tell you this approach makes perfect sense because in healthcare, we know that prevention is always way more effective than treatment. Small, consistent actions prevent big problems. The same principle applies to housekeeping. Here's something that might sound a little counterintuitive. Our grandmothers and great-grandmothers, they had cleaner, more organized homes, partly because they simply owned less stuff. You knew I was going to say this. Didn't you know I was going to say this? And it's not because they were minimalists by choice. It's because they approached acquiring things way differently than we do today. They didn't buy things just because they were on sale or because they might need them someday or because they were like, ooh, what's that? I need to buy it. Every purchase was deliberate. Every item that came into the house had to earn its place by being genuinely useful, and not just potentially useful. They asked themselves, do I actually need this? Really, really need this? And not, can I afford this? Not that everybody buying stuff these days says, can I afford this? Also, they weren't into wasting money unless they needed it. Modern marketing has convinced us every problem requires a corresponding gadget. And now I'm not romanticizing scarcity or suggesting that having fewer options has always been better, because it isn't, but there's something to be learned from their approach to ownership. They understood that every item you bring into your home, it requires care, storage space, and mental energy to maintain. So they were naturally selective about what deserved that investment. Now, farmers and rural families especially understood this principle because they couldn't just run to the store every time they needed something. So they were careful about what they acquired. I mean, talk about the money, but on the time and the effort, anyway. But here's the key. They didn't try to own everything themselves. Their communities were built around borrowing and lending. So if you needed a ladder for a weekend project, like a really tall ladder, you'd borrow it from your neighbor who had the tall ladder. If you needed a large pot for canning season, someone in the community had one you could use. If you needed a tool for a specific job, there was usually somebody willing to lend you what you needed. And this wasn't just about saving money, it was about understanding that not every household needed to own every possible item. But, and here's a part, I have got some pushback on this topic in the past. And the reason I say this is because they're like, I wouldn't want to lend my stuff and people, broken and whatever. You were very careful with the items that you borrowed. You would return things in better condition than you received them. Now, we had a pressure washer that we had once lent to somebody, and it did not come back in good condition. It was broke, and this thing was like hundreds of dollars. So do beware, but also share. Now, if you compare this to today, where we feel like we need to own everything we might possibly use, we don't know our neighbors, we buy tools for one-time projects, kitchen gadgets for recipes we only make once a year, or we make once and we never make again, exercise equipment for fitness phases that last 3 months, and then we wonder why our homes feel cluttered and overwhelming. And our ancestors also took care of what they owned in ways that we have completely forgotten. They didn't see things as disposable or easily replaceable. A good coat was expected to last decades, so it was properly cleaned, mended, and stored. Furniture was built to last generations, so it was polished, repaired, and maintained. Tools were cleaned after every use and properly stored to prevent rust and damage. And this wasn't just about being super frugal, although they were. It was about understanding that quality items properly cared for actually made life easier than constantly replacing cheap things. Now, a well-maintained cast iron pan would outlast dozens of nonstick pans. A solid wood table would serve multiple generations, while particle board furniture might not survive one move. They also understood the difference between needs and wants in ways that we've lost. So they might want to buy a new dress, but they also know that they need to buy a winter coat that would last several seasons. They might want to buy matching dishes, but they needed their mismatched plates to be clean and functional. So this clarity about priorities, it meant that their money and their energy, it went towards things that actually improved their daily lives. And I'm not saying have a bunch of mismatched stuff. Most of my plates match. But this approach, it actually made housekeeping easier, not harder. Because when you own fewer things, there's less to clean, less to organize, and less to maintain. So who can't celebrate that? Because when everything you own has a specific purpose and a designated place, tidying up becomes automatic. When you take care of what you have, you're not constantly dealing with broken or worn out items. And from my nursing background and from what I've seen in my membership, I know how clutter and excess possessions can actually impact people's health and well-being. Homes filled with too much stuff become harder to clean properly, which can affect air quality and hygiene. The mental load of managing too many possessions, it creates stress that shows up in physical symptoms. Stress, anxiety, many things that come with that. Our ancestors knew something that we're just rediscovering, that having less stuff, but taking better care of it actually creates way more peace and satisfaction than constantly acquiring new things. They found joy in maintaining and using quality items and not in shopping for the next thing that they thought they needed. Or can you think of a time where you fixed something and you were like, I fixed it, and you were so happy. Now, I'm not saying live like it's 1940, and I don't think there are any songs about that, but to recapture some of the intentionality about what we bring into our homes. To understand that every possession is either serving our lives or demanding our attention. I think that sometimes the most luxurious thing you can do is to actually have space to breathe in your own home. Here's what I think we've lost more than any specific technique or routine. Our grandmothers, and of course not all of them, but they saw housework not as drudgery, but as self-care. Somewhere along the way, we started acting like caring for ourselves was oppression. But no, they understood that a well-maintained home was a gift to themselves and to their families, and not a burden that they had to bear. They took genuine pride in a well-run household, and not because they were trying to impress anyone. I mean, if somebody was impressed, I'm sure they did not mind. And not because they had nothing else to do, because obviously they did, but maybe they understood that their environment directly impacted their family's well-being. These cats, I'm telling you. I remember once my mom talking to my grandma about her house and being like, oh, that was so much work. And my grandma was like, I took pride in my house. And I think that's cool. A clean, organized, peaceful home, it was seen as essential to a good life, not optional when you had time for it. Now, I have a philosophy that your home should be like medicine for your mind, because I think our ancestors maybe intuitively suspected this. When you get home from a stressful day out, I think you should be like, oh, I'm home and my house is clean and it's put together. Plus, cleaning and doing a good job was just what they did. It was what they always did. And the house wasn't adding to your stress. Failed crops, on the other hand, they might have. Now, I'm not suggesting we go back to doing laundry with a washboard or give up our dishwashers, because you would have to prime my dishwasher out of my cold dead hands. But there are elements of old-fashioned cleaning that could transform how we feel about our homes today. And that's why I make these videos, so that we can get back to appreciating and enjoying homemaking a little bit more. So you could start with the never walk empty-handed principle, or maybe a simple weekly schedule, maybe something you could do on Mondays and Tuesdays and Thursdays. It doesn't have to be rigid, but just having designated days for different tasks prevents everything from piling up at once. And I actually practice what I call minimalist light, and it's very much inspired by old-fashioned approaches to housekeeping, because I have what I need for taking care of the house, for hobbies and interests, but I don't keep more than I use, need, or genuinely love. I have systems that work for my actual life, not some fantasy version of who I might become. And the goal, it's not to create the 1930s domesticity. The goal is to create a home that serves your well-being instead of demanding your constant attention. Now, our grandmothers, they figured out how to do this with fewer resources and more constraints than we can today. We could learn from their wisdom while adapting it to our modern lives too. But you know who managed to create beauty in the face of unimaginable struggle? That was the women during the Great Depression. They had to keep spotless homes with literally nothing, making soap from kitchen scraps and creating weekly cleaning schedules so efficient that they make modern productivity experts weep. And these weren't just cleaning tips, they were survival systems for women during the Great Depression. So check that out here. I hope something great happens for you today. Please like, subscribe, give us a hype, stay tidy and mighty. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.